Hello everyone, it's George Ireland. In this video, I'm considering the repercussions were Russia to win in Ukraine. And by Ukraine, I mean conquering Ukraine. Remember Putin's war aims, which he laid out as soon as he declared the so-called special military operation to denazify and to demilitarize Ukraine. At that stage, swearing that he had no designs on a single millimeter of Ukraine. Wow, what a lie that was. And predicted that he would try and absorb some of the regions, and yes, within 7 months, he declared several of its regions part of Russia, four of its regions, as well as Crimea, which they claimed months earlier. Demilitarized to get rid of all their armed forces. Well, they failed to do that. Denazify, that is their euphemism for really having a puppet government there. Any Ukrainian who doesn't want to be oppressed by Putin is a Nazi in Putin's book. So going back to the old KGB playbook, you're either a communist or a Nazi. There is no middle ground, conservative, liberal, environmentalist, whatever. They say, oh, that's a Nazi in disguise. Of course, Putin doesn't call himself a communist these days, and he's not into the economic side of it, but he is into the totalitarianism, the hyper-nationalism, and the ultra-aggression. Just not the pretended social justice. But an unlikely scenario at the moment that Russia would conquer the whole of Ukraine. They control something like 20% of it. Of course, it's possible that Ukraine could collapse and Russia could drive forward. Fast thrusts are going to be difficult because the Russians have lost so many tanks, so many howitzers, and so forth. Um, and of course, the tempo of war is going to slow down. They can't keep up this rate of casualties. Coming into spring, by March, the snow will be melting, be very muddy, and that again slows things down. You can always advance, but just not at the same speed. Okay, by May, it'll be warm and dry again, and prime campaigning season, May to September. But supposing the Ruskies get to Ukraine, Zelensky is killed, captured, fled, and the Russians put their marionette there, possibly bring back Viktor Yanukovych, who was there, a man there in 2014 till he fled, take the whole of Ukraine. So they would declare its absorption into the Russian Federation. And what else? And this came out on the very first day of the war, that press communique that was put up on Russian government websites, taken down within hours because it's so embarrassingly inaccurate. They gave the game away. So there's some really basic screw ups, all this blundering incompetence. And then they would try and take Belarus, which could be attacked from the south as well as the east, and already Russian bases there. Nobody would come to their aid. Moldova, some Russian war bloggers have said, have a land corridor all the way to Transnistria, the illegally Russian occupied region of Moldova. So they would take that one, and see how that they've just cut them off from gas, willing for them to freeze to death because they don't count 360,000 people. And so, yeah, then they'd be on the border of Romania and so on. Russia had more of the world's oil, more of the world's gas, coal, farmland, particularly grain supply, non-precious metals in particular, population, because Russia's population is shrinking. They claim it's 145 million. Methinks that's a lie, like everything the Kremlin says, more like 140 million. A century from now, it'll be about 70 million. So they're not even 2% of the world's population, but in real and absolute terms, the Russian population is going to decline over the next century. So 100 years from now, there'll be not even 1% of the world's population. Consider the world's population now about 8 billion. In a century, might be about 10 billion. And then conquer the rest of Georgia. They've already got Abkhazia and South Ossetia. And why wouldn't they? Deterrence would have failed. And they think, well, no one's going to come to their aid. These Western countries, they've got a lot of military aid to Ukraine. They're not going to do so to Georgia. Georgia's got only 5 million people. Ukraine had 40 million. Moldova, they could take over very, very easily. Even the most pro-Western people in Moldova are usually not speaking about joining NATO. Moldova joining NATO is a very long way off, partly because of Transnistria, and there's a significant minority of people in Moldova who are Russian leaning, even if they're linguistically and ethnically Romanian. Some of those people. So where does that leave the Baltics, the quondam Soviet republics, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, which were conquered by Russia, part of the Russian Empire for centuries, attacked again by the Soviet Union in 1970, and a lot of their intelligentsia just sent to slave labor camps in Siberia, if not executed. The massive scale use of torture for anyone who wasn't communist, liberal, conservative, Democrat of any kind, and trying to deracinate them, bring Russians in, move Latvians, Lithuanians, and Estonians out, so there wouldn't be such a big majority of their own country. So that would be released on them again. NATO countries, yeah, but what they do is they break the boundary by an inch. The Russians test, resolve. They've already for over a decade they've been taking down the computer systems, cutting the undersea cables, so denial of service attacks, error 404, and all the rest of it. Shutting down navigation systems on planes, which you could easily cause a civilian airline to crash and hundreds of deaths. So some sort of gray zone warfare before it gets kinetic. Bombs go off, a false flag incident, claim the Russian minority there are persecuted. There's a massacre of them. Create fake imageries. They plan to do with Ukraine, but because the CIA and MI6 rumbled the plot and went public about it, Russia didn't go through with that one. So, bit like before the Soviet Union invaded Finland in 1939, they bombarded their own village, the Soviets, and claimed the Finns had done it as casus spelli. So invading those countries, thinking that NATO wouldn't respond. Trump's talking about withdrawing from NATO. I don't think he will. I could be mistaken. Um, and what else? And then Article 5 would be triggered, whether the United States in it or not. NATO would just discuss it. Would they go to the aid of the Baltics? I think some wouldn't, particularly Turkey. Find some excuse not to, leave them in the lurch, and so on. And so he might just start with Estonia, move on to the others, see the response, saying, oh, there's not going to be a nuclear response. He wouldn't be so sure. But if he really came to the brink of war with NATO, would some people in the Russian establishment take him out? As possible, there would be a palace coup. But he could try and observe those. I mean, easier victims if he's conquered Georgia at that point would be Armenia, a country of only 3 million people, sandwiched in two hostile states, Azerbaijan and Turkey, and nobody is in a position to help them out. They got an amicable relationship with Iran, the Armenians, but Iran is in no position to aid them, even if they wish to, because obviously the other threat from Israel, the United States, Saudi Arabia, and so on, their economy is really struggling. So he could try and rebuild the Soviet Union. And then what are the other former Soviet states which border him? Kazakhstan. That was the easy target to go for. 18 million people, a very, very long border, over 2,000 kilometers, rich in oil, gas, chemicals, metals, coal, a huge amounts of agricultural land. And okay, there's some steppe and desert as well. But that border is completely indefensible. It's a member of the Collective Security Treaty Organization. So Russia's actually got a couple of bases there, particularly the space station. That's not really military. But who would help them out? The only thing is the Chinese might be unhappy about that. So conquer a few more countries. Now, I mean, some of the ultra nationalists, like the late Vladimir Zhirinovsky, said, "What about Alaska? This 1867 purchase doesn't count. Come back to us." Now, I think even Putin is not loony enough to go directly for the United States. But Ukraine would not be the last victim. They could try and conquer Poland. Remember, Eastern Poland was part of the Russian Empire for about 150 years, so could try and retake that. So it's a very grim scenario. Even if only a small fractions plays out, Putin's prestige will be boosted, his position will be more secure, and so on. Other countries might say, well, sanctions have failed, should we lift sanctions, and so forth. So let's not let it happen. And obviously, it would embolden China to retake Taiwan. And I know the People's Republic of China has got a strong case to Taiwan, as most of the world recognizes it as Chinese sovereign territory. Only about a half dozen countries recognize Taiwan as a sovereign state. Thank you for watching my channel. Make sure to subscribe on Patreon, donate to PayPal. Goodbye.